Over Every Extinguished Past by Tucuxi. The last part, Part 2. Sometime later, the schoolgirl, Naomi, Yosano calls her, and that jostles his memory, reminds him that she's Tanizaki's sister. Brings in a pair of supermarket bentos, bottles of green tea, and sweets. Yosano eats mechanically, which Chuuya thinks it's pretty much the only way to eat this kind of meal, and then gets up to check the IV bags to replace one that's nearly run out. Chuuya takes a breath, and then, figuring there's no delicate way to ask this question, dives right in. Who does he trust most at the agency? Chuuya asks, hoping that Yosano will be distracted enough by her focus on the IV tubing to give him an honest answer. Yosano finishes her task and then sits down in the chair opposite to him, the one Naomi brought in for Kunikida. That depends on what you mean, she says, meeting his eyes without a hint of fear or surprise. Dazai doesn't trust easily, and he's only been here 2 years. 2 years is practically a lifetime to have the same people at your side in the Port Mafia. It's also a blink of an eye when compared to the immense span that makes up Dazai's trust issues. It occurs to Chuuya that he still doesn't know exactly why Dazai left when and how he did. Oda's death and Ango's defection during the affair with Mimic are certainly indicative. And there have been rumors. He's even heard some of the rumors over the years, despite most people clamming up about Dazai whenever Chuuya passes by. Still, nothing had seemed quite like enough of a reason, and Chuuya has sometimes allowed himself to wonder if there was more to it than Mimic, than Oda, than a snap decision. When he's injured, who does he tell? Chuuya tries, because that's what he really needs to know. Yosano laughs, a harsh, bitter thing. What makes you think he tells anyone at all? It's a good day if I catch him stealing medical supplies and can get someone to sit on him. Otherwise, he handles it himself. Chuuya blinks. He's been assuming, from the easy banter Dazai tosses back and forth with his co-workers, from the light smiles and arms slung around shoulders, that Dazai had settled into the agency, that he'd stopped running. It looks like maybe he was wrong. Oh, he says. He squashes down the rising anger, the incipient rage at the idea that these people haven't yet earned Dazai's trust, the knowledge that they don't deserve him. His hand twitches, but he doesn't reach out for Dazai's touch. His control is so much better than it was 4 years ago, even after the book. Yosano's eyes flicker down to his hand, even at the small movement, and that awareness, that attention to her surroundings, that knowledge that she sees Chuuya as a potential threat, that helps, oddly enough. Then I'm definitely staying, Chuuya decides. His phone buzzes with a text from Ane-san, a welcome distraction from Yosano's attention. When he opens it, it only says, "Take care." She might know about Dazai, or at least suspect, Chuuya thinks, looking at the lack of detail, the vagueness of her instructions. Ane-san has never been long-winded, but she's never stinted on telling Chuuya when he's not looking after himself properly, and she knows more about Arahabaki than anyone else in the Mafia besides Mori. She should be worried about him, unless she's using this chance to tell him to look after Dazai too. She never did try to get Dazai back, not the way Mori did. She's not trying to get Kyoka back either. While Chuuya is staring at his phone, wondering what this might mean, Yosano gathers up the detritus of their lunch and calls Naomi back in to take away their trash. Chuuya thinks perhaps he should be offended that she won't leave him alone with Dazai, even for long enough to throw things away. Instead, He's reluctantly appreciative. "No," Naomi says to someone else outside the door as she's leaving. "You're not to go in there. President's orders. Come on, I'm doing the shopping. You can come pick extra snacks." The voice that complains in reply can only be Rampo, but it trails away from the door. Chuuya clenches his fists, reminds himself that he hasn't tested Tainted yet sufficiently since he's been out of the book to be sure he wouldn't bring down the building on them all if he lashed out at the brat. And leaving the room to strangle him in person, while satisfying, would almost certainly break his implicit promise to Kunikida, and disappoint Anei-san. "You don't need sleep?" Chuuya asks, not because he's unaware of her fatigue, but because he wants to know how she'll answer. "I do," she admits, "but not urgently enough to wake Kunikida. I'm used to it." And she goes back to her desk. Chuuya would be impressed at her turning her back on him if she didn't have a mirror in plain sight, if she weren't functionally invulnerable to physical harm. She knows he won't hurt Dazai, and she knows she can recover from anything he does to her, not to mention any such noise would alert the others. Chuuya shakes his head and goes back to his book, wishing he had a proper cup of tea to rinse the artificial bottled tea taste out of his mouth. He's gotten through another chapter and a half when the door slams open. Chuuya is on his feet in the same instant as Yosano. Chuuya knows he's limed in red, can feel Tainted thrumming under his skin, telling him the position of every object in the room, their weights, their relative masses. Yosano has scalpels between her fingers in a pose eerily reminiscent of Mori. Akutagawa storms in as if he thinks he has any right or reason to be here, as if he hasn't been updated on Dazai's condition, as if Nakajima couldn't have been convinced to call for more information. He stops dead in his tracks when he sees Chuuya, confusion clear on his face. "You can't just..." Nakajima protests, hot on his heels. He shuts up abruptly when he slams into Akutagawa's back. "Chuuya-san," Akutagawa says, obviously surprised. He reels in Rashomon a bit. "Where's Dazai-san?" Chuuya nods at the hospital bed behind him, even more glad now that he'd done Dazai's bandages up properly. "Damp Rashomon all the way down," he snaps, "and be quiet." To his left, Yosano hasn't relaxed a bit, though she must know she's no match for Rashomon. She'd fight to the death for Dazai, Chuuya thinks. It's a bittersweet realization. "Hey!" Nakajima says, and puts his hands on Akutagawa's shoulders, turning him around like a parent moving a toddler, like he has any right to touch the Port Mafia's most terror-aspiring assassin, like doing so hasn't been very nearly a guaranteed death sentence for anyone other than Gin. Akutagawa must really be trying not to kill people, as Mori said. Chuuya can't imagine why he allows it. "He's okay," Nakajima says. "I told you Dazai-san was okay. Chill out." And Nakajima actually gives him a small shake, like he thinks he's a mama cat scruffing a kitten. Akutagawa scowls in response and shoves Nakajima's hands away from his shoulders. "Like I trust you, Jinko," he snarls. But there's no real heat to it, and he's keeping his voice down. Chuuya doesn't allow his utter disbelief to show on his face, and he doesn't sit down, but he does step slightly aside to allow the two of them to enter the room. Both of Dazai's protégés will want to be sure he's alive. More importantly, Chuuya's pretty sure that Dazai would want them to know, to stop worrying. "Keep your voices down, or I'll throw you out," Yosano says, tone harsh, but the scalpels have disappeared. "As if you could," Akutagawa scoffs, and Chuuya glares at him. "That's irrelevant," Chuuya says. "We both know I could." He keeps his voice low and conversational, almost casual except for the part where he hasn't released Tainted entirely. Not yet. "Nakahara-san?" Nakajima exclaims, surprised, too loud, and then he makes a hasty zipping his lips gesture when Yosano glares at him. What are you doing here? Chuuya resists the urge to roll his eyes. Akutagawa as Dazai's trainee, he can understand. Mori hadn't given Dazai much choice about being the one to train him to use Rashomon. Between no longer human and Dazai's willingness to do what was necessary to achieve Mori's aims, it had seemed an obvious match. But Nakajima? The kid seems like Dazai's polar opposite, all cheer and optimism and oblivious trust. He doesn't seem to be prone to flinching away from Dazai either, which makes Chuuya curious about his training despite himself. He's standing guard over Dazai-san, idiot, Akutagawa hisses. Close the door. Nakajima closes the door with exaggerated care, and then turns back to see Akutagawa seated across from Chuuya, and no chair left for him. Why? Nakajima asks, and folds himself onto the floor without protest, seating himself where he can see both of them, but still well within their offensive range. This kid seems to have virtually no self-protective instincts. Chuuya is tempted to hit him with something just to force him to pay more attention to his surroundings. Akutagawa frowns down at Nakajima. Why what? He asks. Nakajima scrubs one hand across the back of his head, visibly embarrassed, and looks to one side, but still answers the question. Why is he standing guard over Dazai-san? I mean, no offense, Nakahara-san, but you're not part of the agency. So why are you here? I'm pretty sure Dazai-san said you would be mad at him. You don't seem mad. Chuuya can practically feel Yosano's gaze on him, and he's not sure how to answer such an earnest question. It's more than a little bit of a relief when Akutagawa laughs and answers for him. So what? He says. They were partners for longer than Dazai-san has been part of the agency, weren't they? It sounds perfectly sensible when Akutagawa puts it like that. It sounds like he really thinks Dazai leaving didn't create an unbridgeable chasm between the two of them. And maybe it didn't for him and Dazai. Maybe Dazai's absence hasn't been a horrible, sucking void at the center of his life. But Rashomon isn't anything like For the Tainted Sorrow, and it isn't anything like Arahabaki. Akutagawa has never needed Dazai the way Chuuya did, the way Chuuya still does, as much as he tries not to think about it. Oh, Nakajima says. Okay, I'm glad Dazai-san has such good friends. He leans back on his hands, clearly willing to just accept that explanation, to fit Chuuya into his picture of Dazai's life as a good friend, someone who will stand guard for him as a matter of course. Chuuya wants to smack that complacency out of him, wants to shake him until his teeth rattle, wants to crush him until the tiger's regeneration can't help him anymore. How dare Nakajima treat the situation as if anything about Chuuya and Dazai, could possibly be so simple? Maybe it could be, Chuuya thinks, if the two of them could manage to let go of old grudges. But Dazai never lets go of anything that might be of advantage to him. Hoards facts and tidbits and old bets like ammunition, pulls them out with nearly surgical precision. Always the right tool for the job at hand. So Chuuya has learned to stay on his guard. He'll never be able to stop Dazai from hitting him in his weak spots, from trapping him into making the choices Dazai wants. But he tells himself it hurts less if he expects it. He can't imagine what it would feel like if he let himself trust Dazai. Akutagawa coughs and Chuuya glares at him. What? Nakajima demands, looking between them. Nothing, Akutagawa says. It's not nothing, Nakajima says, sitting up, virtually quivering with visible indignation. His voice is rising. That's your I'm not saying something cough. Chuuya blinks and sees a faint flush rise in Akutagawa's cheeks. Oh, he thinks. It's like that then. No, it's not! Akutagawa snaps, and he's clearly forgotten about being quiet as well. It is! Nakajima nearly yells, popping to his feet in a fluid, nearly inhuman motion. Akutagawa stands up too, and they face each other at arm's length. Boys, Yosano says. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. Both of them freeze, and then turn their heads to look at her. Get out, she says pleasantly. But, Nakajima protests. But nothing, Yosano replies. You've seen that Dazai is here. Go bicker somewhere else. Nakajima opens his mouth, and Yosano's glare intensifies. Nakajima grabs Akutagawa's wrist and starts hauling him towards the door. Akutagawa, Chuuya says, voice soft, and the boys both pause. I'm sure I don't have to remind you of how much trust has been extended to you by allowing you in here. Dazai-san would be very disappointed if he found out you'd said anything that would violate his privacy. To anyone. Are we clear? Nakajima looks confused, but Akutagawa nods, expression going stiffly determined. Yes, Chuuya-san, he says and allows himself to be towed out of the room. Yosano sighs. Chuuya leans over and pokes Dazai in the upper arm, testing. If Dazai didn't react to that level of noise, either he's faking, keeping his heart rate low and his breathing steady in order to listen in, or he's still drugged out of his mind. Chuuya pokes him again, then flicks him on the forehead. Dazai's breathing doesn't change, and he doesn't flinch away from the flick. You've got him very heavily sedated, Chuuya observes. Yosano nods. He has a fractured tibia, she says. Bruised ribs, 2 broken fingers, contusions and abrasions, possible head trauma. Keeping him sedated gives him time to reset, so to speak, and lets me keep the inflammation to a minimum. Chuuya winces at the list, though he'd guessed most of it already. He's very much not a doctor. He's never been able to follow the kinds of conversations doctors have around and above him after he's used corruption, though Dazai always seemed to keep up with the details just fine. Chuuya chalked that up to Dazai having worked in Mori's clinic. He knows inflammation in the brain is bad. He also knows Dazai hates being sedated. Is it still necessary? Chuuya asks. Maybe, maybe not, Yosano says. She nods at the door. Who'll he tell? Akutagawa? Chuuya asks. No one. He knows how to keep his mouth shut, and he's still utterly terrified of disappointing Dazai. And who have you told? Yosano asks. Maybe Chuuya should be offended, but she's not beating around the bush or implying he has twisted loyalties. She's just demanding information that will help her keep her co-worker safe, keep Dazai safe. In so many words, no one, Chuuya says. Goyo probably guessed. She'll keep quiet. If she wanted to hurt Dazai, there's been plenty of time since he left the Port Mafia, and plenty of other chances recently. No one's told you, boss? She asks. Her tone is oddly flat, as if she's compressing all the emotions out of it, as if she's forcing herself to be unaffected by the questions she's asking. Not to my knowledge, Chuuya says. I called Akutagawa to see about sparring when I woke up, and Nakajima let it slip in the background. My phone could always be bugged, or Akutagawa's, but no one who knows is going to submit a formal report. He still needs to set up sparring with Akutagawa. He didn't remember to bring it up earlier, and he can still feel Arahabaki stirring, more restless than it's been in years, more unsettled. His bones ache with it, and he's stiffer and more tense than he's been in a long time. He needs to find his current limits, and soon. Sparring will be the best way to do that. It would be better if Dazai were there, just in case, but that hasn't been an option for years. One fight against Lovecraft isn't going to change things that much. Chuuya's willpower and code phrase has been enough to cut corruption off before it starts these last 4 years, to resolve any situation and keep his gloves on. It's had to be. But he'll find out, Yosano says. She sounds grim. Chuuya drags himself back into the present for a moment, into the conversation about Dazai, about who knows he's injured, about controlling the flow of information to Mori. Yosano sounds far more concerned about this than Chuuya would have expected. Yes, Chuuya says, because Mori finds out most things that happen in Yokohama sooner or later, if he cares enough to try. But not from the three of us, not today. She shakes her head. It'll have to do, she says. Bad timing, though. He could tell her there's never a good time to have a broken leg, but there are bad times, and there are worse times, and there are catastrophic times. He's honestly not sure which of these this is, and he doesn't want to speculate. He's going to be insufferable, Chuuya says, looking at Dazai. And he'll be worse if he wakes up with serious painkillers still in his system. He hates how much they slow him down. Yosano looks at him. You're not just trying to fuck with him? She says. It sounds like she thought that was a serious possibility. What? Chuuya demands. No! You're telling me to withdraw painkillers from someone with a broken leg, she points out. Forgive me, Nakahara-san, but given your somewhat adversarial history with Dazai, I had to be sure. The door opens, and Kunikida slips in and shuts it behind himself. He looks slightly rumpled, but clearly better for having slept 8 hours. Chuuya keeps the majority of his focus on Yosano. I'm telling you that Dazai hates waking up on any kind of IV-delivered painkiller. If you keep giving him anything you'd give a normal person for a broken leg, he's going to be furious with you, he says. But he hates pain, Kunikida protests, giving Dazai a quick once-over. Yeah, Chuuya agrees. So what? Everybody hates pain. This is Dazai we're talking about. He hates being unable to think clearly, way more than he hates pain. Kunikida pushes his glasses up his nose. Yosano stares at him. Chuuya stares back. You didn't know that, he says. It's such a basic thing, he thinks. Such a completely baseline part of his understanding of Dazai, of how Dazai works. How can they not notice this after 2 years? Of course Dazai wants to be able to think clearly. Of course he'll tolerate pain to have a clear head. He complains about how much he hates pain all the time, Kunikida offers. He sounds uncharacteristically subdued. Chuuya snorts. And you listen whenever he complains about anything? He asks. Of course, he thinks. Of course these soft agency fools take Dazai at face value. Of course they listen when he whines and protests and puts up a facade of discomfort. No, Kunikida says, and he sounds offended. He complains constantly. He never means it. But he hates pain. He's made that very clear. Chuuya shakes his head. He only complains when it doesn't matter, he says. Now he's absolutely sure he believes what Yosano said earlier about Dazai sneaking in to steal medical supplies instead of telling her when he's injured. If they haven't even figured this much out, if Dazai hasn't allowed them to even figure this much out, it's when he's not complaining that you have to pay attention, Chuuya says. Yosano nods, looks strangely meditative. How do you not know this? Chuuya demands, and Yosano and Kunikida exchange a blank, slightly surprised look. These people are supposed to have Dazai's back. They're supposed to be on his side, to keep him safe now that Chuuya can't. Dazai left, and that's fine. That was his choice. But he chose the agency, and if they don't even know this, well, Chuuya doesn't know what to do with that. He grabs for Dazai's wrist again, centering himself with the cool blue wash of his ability, feeling like a failure for needing it, for wanting it, for finding it reassuring, like proof of life, proof that Chuuya's not in the book anymore. He doesn't get injured very often, Kunikida says. He looks terribly guilty, as if he's blaming himself for not knowing this about his partner. And Chuuya feels tired all over again, exhausted, because of course Dazai hasn't told anyone about this. Of course he's played his cards close to his chest with a shit-eating grin and over-the-top complaints to keep them all at arm's length. Chuuya nods. Yosano comes over and starts doing doctorly things on the other side of the hospital bed. Kunikida hovers, hands twitching at his sides, and Chuuya lets go of Dazai's wrist and leans back. "Well," he says, "like I said, it's when he's not complaining that you have to worry. He'll try to walk on that broken leg within the week, and he won't tell you it hurts if he thinks you'll try to stop him. He might not even notice it hurting. Sometimes he gets too focused on other things to remember he should be in pain." He shrugs and makes eye contact with Yosano and Kunikida in turn. "But if you let him wake up feeling blurry, he's not going to trust you enough to even think about telling you he needs help. Not when it matters." Yosano nods. "Mori raised him," she says, looking intently at the IV line. It's not a question, not exactly. "For a while, yes," Chuuya agrees, because even he doesn't know exactly how long Dazai was under Mori's care before they met at 15. Long enough to have attempted suicide several times, not his whole life. "Then he'll wake up as clear-headed as I can manage," she says. Not for the first time, Chuuya wonders what her history with Mori is. Clearly there's something, and just as clearly, asking about it would be a mistake. Yosano moves around briskly, checking several things, making notes on a paper chart, and when she's done, there's only one IV bag on the stand, and only one needle in Dazai's left arm. "That's just saline," she says. "If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I'm going to sleep for a few hours. Send Naomi to get me when Dazai wakes up. I'll be paged if any of the alarms go off." Yosano closes the door quietly on her way out, which leaves Chuuya seated and Kunikida still hovering. "Sit down," Chuuya says. "You don't need to keep trying to loom threateningly. It's not impressive enough to alarm me in the first place, and I haven't got any immediate plans you'd object to anyway." He's a little surprised to realize that's true. He's not even planning on writing on Dazai's face, or on his bandages, as he did when they were kids, or on fucking with him when he wakes up. Maybe it's personal growth. Maybe Chuuya's still tired from being in the damn book, and glad to talk to real people who really exist, who have personalities and motivations more complicated than whatever Poe dreamed up. "You're still here," Kunikida says, lowering himself into the chair. His legs are clearly too long for it, and he props his elbows on his knees, looking a bit like a bespectacled praying mantis. "I said I would be," Chuuya points out. "You've no reason to be," Kunikida replies. He sounds half concerned, half like he's solving a logic puzzle. He's so different from Dazai, whose mind works at lightning speed, who has always reasoned every step out within a heartbeat, who knows the answer before Chuuya is certain of the question. Dazai must run circles around him, this new partner of his, and enjoy every minute of it. "I said I would be," Chuuya repeats. "I don't make a habit of lying, unlike some people." Chuuya lies infrequently, in fact. A habit that has driven Anei-san to despairing sighs more than once, and caused Mori to threaten him with interrogation training exactly once. He doesn't usually need to lie. Dazai was good enough at that for the both of them, for one thing, and by the time he was gone, Chuuya had a reputation as someone whose word was good, as far as the mafia trusts such things. Kunikida sighs and looks at Dazai, who is still unconscious, who still looks uncannily small. Chuuya resists the urge to tuck his hair out of his face, to be sure both of his eyes are uncovered. I suppose you don't, Kunikida says. Unlike some people. He sounds particularly exasperated, the tone of it familiar from Chuuya's own thoughts. Something about it makes him bristle. It's the familiarity, perhaps, the idea that anyone else might have that kind of insight into Dazai, that anyone else might think they understand him in this way. He doesn't lie when it matters, Chuuya says. He's surprised by how hostile it sounds, even as he hears himself speaking. Dazai would make something of that if he were awake, but he's not awake. He's out cold, and that's the whole problem, isn't it? No, Kunikida agrees, taking off his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. You're right, he doesn't. It's like you said, it's when he stops talking that we should be most worried. Chuuya shrugs, feeling the pull on his shoulders, the reminder that has not been active enough today, the tension settling into his bones, tendons, muscles. He lies as easily as breathing, Kunikida says. He sounds baffled, like he doesn't understand the very concept. It's like the truth doesn't matter to him. Why would it? Chuuya asks. Most things depend on how you look at them, don't they? Dazai's a spiteful asshole who left Chuuya up shit creek and enjoyed blowing his car. Dazai left the way he did to keep Chuuya safe from mafia politics. They're both true. They're both lies. Kunikida blinks. I can't think like that, he says. Right and wrong exist. He sounds like this is a linchpin of his worldview, like it's the fulcrum on which he relies to be able to move everything else. Chuuya shrugs again. Not for Dazai, he says. He's better at pretending now, I think, but... He stops himself. If Kunikida hasn't realized yet that Dazai doesn't have an internal moral compass, that Dazai is acting, as far as Chuuya can tell, on guesswork and extrapolation, well, Chuuya isn't going to tell him. There was a time when Chuuya would have told Kunikida more, would have delighted in the attempt to destroy something Dazai might hold dear. But how much of it is still pretense? Kunikida says. It's almost not a question. You'd have to ask him when he's too tired to lie. Chuuya replies, tipping his head back, leaning back in the chair. He's tempted to put his hat over his face, to let Kunikida keep watch. He's been awake longer than this on less sleep, but not in a while, and not often when he's already running so close to empty, when Arahabaki is so demanding. He's never too tired to lie, Kunikida says. He sounds baffled and still exhausted even after 8 hours of sleep. Chuuya can't tell if that's the lack of sleep in the last 2 days, the after effects of Yosano-sensei's healing ability, or the mere idea of dealing with Dazai. It might be all three. No, Chuuya agrees, sitting back up. He thinks he's glad that Kunikida has realized this much at least about his partner, and simultaneously annoyed that he can't realize more. You're right, but he can't be too tired to care enough to bother with it, under certain circumstances. Kunikida looks at him over his glasses. He says. He sounds skeptical. I've never seen him that tired. Chuuya almost laughs. You don't have anyone on staff whose ability needs to be nullified non-stop, do you? No cases that needed that? After a couple of days straight, he stops caring enough to lie. Kunikida looks shocked. Several days? That level of sleep deprivation would be torture, he protests. Chuuya blinks at him, genuinely startled that this is what Kunikida chooses to object to. It's the port mafia, he says. Do you really think we care about, what, obeying the Geneva Convention? I'm pretty sure the only time anyone in the port mafia has heard of that was when Dazai used their lists as a starting point for devising more efficient interrogation procedures for an Asan staff. Kunikida flinches a little bit, perhaps at the reminder that his partner used to be one of the bad guys, that he did terrible things. Good, Chuuya thinks fiercely. Dazai might be different now, but his blood still runs black. Every day Dazai works for the agency is an active choice, and they should appreciate that instead of pretending he sprang unblemished from the soil only 2 years ago. Fair enough, Kunikida says after a moment. But that level of sleep deprivation is inhumane. Chuuya had been awake for most of it, once or twice. He can't exactly disagree. It was necessary, he says. The boss uses the tools at his disposal to achieve his ends. Kunikida looks pained, but doesn't say anything immediately. His silence is rebuke enough, and the silence that falls between them is strained, awkward with all the things neither of them is saying. If that's what it takes to make Dazai stop lying, Kunikida finally says, breaking the silence with a faint, almost tentative smile. I think I'm not gonna have much luck getting the truth out of him. Chuuya quirks a grin at the very idea of Kunikida attempting to out-stamina Dazai where sleep deprivation is concerned. Not really your style, no, he agrees. Besides, it doesn't make him stop lying entirely, just makes him care less about bothering with it. He stops, remembering shifts in Dazai's demeanor, minor changes when Mori would come in to check on them. He remembers differences in how Dazai had reacted to other people, to Mori. He'd always cared enough to keep up a facade with Mori, no matter how many days it had been, no matter how flimsy the pretense. Well, he amends, mostly. Very few things make him stop lying entirely, including being hit by a car. Kunikida blinks at him. Isn't that right, Dazai? Chuuya says and pokes Dazai in the ribs where he knows it's bound to hurt. Ow! Dazai complains, which is a good sign because it means he's feeling well enough to complain. Such a violent hat rack. What? Kunikida exclaims and shoots to his feet. Dazai? Quiet, Chuuya hisses. Keep your voice down. Either go get Yosano or send Naomi to get her like she asked. Kunikida hovers for a moment, then goes to the door. Dazai watches him go, looks around the room, clearly taking in his surroundings and doing a situation assessment. His eyes are tracking, which is good. He's not still complaining, which is bad. Condition report. Chuuya says, voice clipped, as if he's talking to one of his subordinates, as if he's gone back in time, as if it's 4, 5, 6 years ago, and Dazai's gotten himself hurt. It didn't happen often, but it happened often enough that this isn't entirely new, just new enough to be strange in the differences. Leg, ribs, fingers, headache. Dazai says, almost automatically. I can work. Then he blinks and looks up at the IV stand. I can't work, he says, contradicting himself, and there's an undercurrent of something to his tone, something Chuuya doesn't like. Don't tell him I can't work. I can work soon. Chuuya shakes his head. The agency is used to you not working, he says, scolding. No one here expects you to do real work, idiot. Dazai blinks at him again, and maybe his eyes aren't tracking quite as well as Chuuya thought. That's just saline, right, Chuuya? Chuuya looks at him, really looks at him. It looks like, despite Yosano's efforts, he's still drugged more heavily than Chuuya has seen since before the Dragon's Head incident. Yeah, Dazai, Chuuya says. It's just saline. You were out almost 24 hours. You scared your people pretty bad. Dazai blinks at him, and something seems to occur to him. It must be happening in extra slow motion inside Dazai's mind for Chuuya to be able to see it so clearly. So clearly. You're here. You're here? Chuuya, you came back. He means more than just being at the agency. That much is clear. Chuuya shakes his head. No thanks to you or Rampo, he says, but there's not as much bite to his tone as he'd intended. Knew you'd get out of the book, Dazai says, but he still sounds a little confused. He reaches a shaking hand out. Chuuya takes it automatically, feeling no longer human wash over him for a moment, glowing blue in an achingly familiar way. Arahabaki shuts up for a moment, retreating to get away from Dazai's ability. Good, Dazai says, forehead scrunching up in concentration. It's not. That's good. And he passes out again, hand falling back to the hospital bed. Well, Chuuya says to Kunikida and Yosano, who are standing in the doorway, one gaping, one contemplative. He feels unsettled for reasons he can't pinpoint. He's going to be fine. I'll be off now. Neither of them protests as he walks out, shuts the door carefully behind himself. In the main office, most of the agency staff are still there, though Rampo is sleeping on his desk, and the others appear to have made small nests on the floor. In one corner, the farm boy and Kyoka are curled around each other like kittens. He's asleep again, he says before Nakajima can finish getting to his feet from next to Kyoka and do anything foolish like rush in. Thankfully, Akutagawa seems to have been sent packing. That is both a surprise and a relief. Chuuya didn't want to have to coerce him into leaving Dazai alone. With this kind of injury, he'll wake up again between 4 and 6 hours. He tells Nakajima, deciding against going back into the office to tell Yosano the things Dazai wouldn't tell her. He can delegate. He'll need to be bullied into eating for at least a week. Miso soup with extra tofu is a good bet. It's easy to digest, and he can't hide it in his pockets, pour it into a plant, or otherwise lie about having eaten it. Nakajima blinks at him, clearly surprised. What? Chuuya demands. You know Dazai doesn't eat properly when he's not feeling well. Apparently he didn't, because Nakajima just looks more surprised. Chuuya shakes his head and pulls out his phone. Give me your number, he says. I'll send you idiot-proof instructions. God knows that asshole can't be trusted to take care of himself, and you're halfway competent. Nakajima practically beams at that, as if he thinks it's a compliment. Given Dazai's training, how Akutagawa responds to the faintest hint of praise from Dazai, it might as well be. Chuuya shakes his head, taps the number in, pockets his phone, and leaves without another word. The motorcycle ride back to his apartment takes a little longer when Chuuya follows speed limits and doesn't run red lights. He parks and forces himself to take the stairs to his apartment to stretch his legs. He's almost tempted to take a flight on his hands just to see if he still can, but it's been a long day, and he's more interested in cooking dinner and stretching than in performative acrobats for an audience of 0. His apartment is empty when he gets there, as it always is. And Eisan has a key, but she's never used it, only visited when expressly invited. Chuuya removes his boots, hangs up his coat and hat, and pads into the kitchen, where he pulls out yesterday's bottle of wine. More awake now, he can see that it's a perfectly acceptable Argentine Malbec, not particularly old, nothing special. He pops the cork, pulls down a red wine glass, and peers into the fridge. His phone feels like it's burning a hole in his pocket, but he doesn't pull it out until he's cooked and eaten dinner, stretched the soreness out of his shoulders, until he's settled in an armchair with the last glass of wine from that bottle, until he can't avoid it any longer. Chuuya downloads a simple encrypted messaging app and enters Nakajima's number. "This is Nagara," he says and starts writing. When he's done, the list of instructions he's compiled is longer than he'd expected. Chuuya looks at it and frowns. He's a little surprised at how much he remembers, which foods Dazai will tolerate, which he can't easily pretend to have eaten, which painkillers he can take, which will he refuse, how to make him prove he's taken a pill. Chuuya has spent so long trying not to remember this kind of detail, because it only serves to remind him of how things were when he and Dazai weren't at odds. They'd been at each other's throats more often than not, and they'd never been friends, not really, not the way Dazai and Oda and Sakaguchi were. But there had been a seamless ease to their partnership that Chuuya's never found since. He works solo now. If he doesn't think about it, he can't miss it. Chuuya shakes his head and hits send. "Don't let him steamroller you," he sends after a moment, though he has little enough hope of it working. "He's a wet noodle. You're strong enough to make him behave, even without the tiger's help." Because Dazai is well enough to use no longer human, which is going to make his recovery that much more of a trial for everyone around him. Chuuya puts his phone down before Nakajima can reply, takes a sip of wine, and looks out the window at the Yokohama skyline. He can almost feel the chill of no longer human working through him all over again. A memory, a sense echo. And Dazai had checked on him as soon as he was awake enough, as soon as he knew where they were, hadn't he? He'd known Chuuya had been in the book, and his first impulse was to test that Arahabaki was controlled, that Chuuya wasn't on the edge of losing control. That means, of course, that Dazai predicted that coming back from the book might fuck with Chuuya's balance with Arahabaki. Chuuya's pretty sure he's going to be livid about that later. But right now, watching the lights on the Ferris wheel spin, Chuuya remembers that shaking hand reaching out to him, and the sheer relief in Dazai's voice when he'd been sure Chuuya was okay. A week into his recovery, Dazai finally makes the effort to slip away from Atsushi's babysitting. He ditches his crutches, too visible, too easily tracked in a crowd, makes his way to the edge of mafia territory, and breaks into Chuuya's apartment while he's still at work. Dazai's pretty sure he's not supposed to know that Chuuya was on forced leave for a week after getting out of the book, but if Akutagawa wants to keep people's secrets, he shouldn't tell Atsushi. The boy is well-meaning as the day is long, and he is also, without question, the worst liar Dazai has ever met. And that's when he even remembers to hide the truth at all. Dazai takes the elevator, out of concession to the aircast, and the fact that he can tell his leg probably wants to hurt, if he could be bothered to pay attention to it. He's sure Yosano will have something to say to him about walking several kilometers without crutches, but it was a hairline fracture, and it's been a week. He's done more strenuous things while handling worse injuries. Admittedly, many of those times he'd had no other choice. But Dazai is bored, and everyone in the agency is disconcertingly well informed about his usual deflections and dodges. He's pretty sure he knows who to blame for that too. Chuuya's security system is appallingly easy to circumvent. Dazai tsk under his breath and lets himself in. His coat nearly brushes the ground when he hangs it up on the low row of hooks, and he leaves his shoes sprawled out in a mess because he knows it will annoy Chuuya. Then Dazai looks around. He hasn't been here before. Chuuya packed his stuff up into storage before going to Europe, and only moved in here a few when he got back. Dazai can tell someone hired a decorator, probably Koyo, before Chuuya's return, because Dazai can also tell that Chuuya is in the process of gradually replacing carefully chosen, picture-perfect showpieces with things he actually likes. Dazai considers raiding the kitchen, but he's not actually here to piss Chuuya off. Not really. Not as his primary goal. Instead, he steps into the living room area, which is divided from the kitchen by a stone-topped island. It's soapstone, he thinks, tapping it with a finger. Not granite, easier to maintain, possibly more expensive. He shakes his head and throws himself into an armchair that has a footrest, propping his right leg up and allowing himself to take stock of his body for a moment before deciding that was a bad idea. He'd rather not know. When Chuuya lets himself in, Dazai hears him trip over a shoe and start swearing. "Dazai!" Chuuya yells. "You waste of... How the fuck did you get in here anyway?" Ah, Dazai thinks. So when he slipped the leash earlier, Atsushi told on him. Chuuya's not nearly surprised enough by his presence for anything else. That confirms Dazai's suspicion. Chuuya was the one Atsushi's been texting all week. The reason the entire agency seems to know how to wrangle Dazai when he's in a temper, when he's in pain. Worse, Chuuya is why they seem to realize all of a sudden that Dazai's silence is more of a warning sign than his complaints ever could be. "Chuuya!" Dazai carols, but doesn't get up. His foot, now that he's not walking, now that he's been sitting still for a bit, really does hurt rather a lot. Is that any way to treat a guest? Chuuya stomps into the room, eyes blazing, and Dazai watches him. There is no red limening his figure, no hint that gravity is misbehaving around him the way Yosano described. He's been hovering on the edge of control in those hours when Dazai had been dead to the world, when Chuuya had sat at his side to stand guard against foes, real and imagined, when Chuuya had grabbed for Dazai's hand to calm his ability down, the way he hasn't needed to since they were 15, 16 years old. "Guests are invited," Chuuya snaps. "Housebreakers are, therefore, by definition, not guests." Dazai waves an airy hand in a way he knows irritates Chuuya. "Semantics," he says, as if he hasn't used similar arguments against Chuuya in the past, as if he won't again, now that they're on speaking terms, sort of, or at least on arguing terms. "What are you doing here, Dazai?" Chuuya asks, arms folded. His hair doesn't show the imprint of the hat he's been wearing all day, which Dazai finds faintly unfair. He never could manage that trick, and he's never been willing to ask. He's still not willing to ask, so he shoves that train of thought aside. "Visiting," Dazai announces. "Right," Chuuya says, and pulls out his phone. "If you're not gonna tell me the truth, I'll just get Nakajima to come pick you up." Dazai scowls. "Half the city will know where you live inside a week." Dazai points out, and Chuuya shrugs, giving him a familiar, cocky smile over the phone. "Good thing I don't like this apartment that much," he says, and Dazai can see him start typing. "I really am visiting," Dazai admits. "I'm bored. Someone told everyone at the agency how to handle me, and it's like they think I need to be wrapped in cotton wool all the time. I'm bored, and Chuuya is never boring, so I'm visiting." Chuuya puts the phone back in his pocket. "There," he says. "Was that so hard?" Dazai wonders what expression will be best here. whether contrition would be believable, whether he should try to play on Chuuya's clear willingness to help him. In the end, he lets habit guide him. "I can't believe you told them I'd pour soup into the houseplants," Dazai whines, stretching dramatically. "So you did try," Chuuya says, "and it didn't work. Was it Yosano who caught you? She seemed to have some sense." From Chuuya, that's practically an endorsement. As Dazai watches, he walks into the kitchen and pulls out a bottle of wine from a wine fridge under the island. "Chuuya, so mean!" Dazai exclaims. "All my best tricks and none of them worked." Chuuya pulls down a wine glass. Dazai can't tell it's a white wine glass, and he doesn't know why that detail has stuck, except that all details stick, don't they? And he's never known why, and pours himself rather less than Dazai usually sees people pour into a wine glass. "Are you on painkillers?" Chuuya asks, back still to the room, facing the rows of glass-fronted cabinets that show off his absurdly extensive stemware collection. When Dazai shakes his head, makes a negative sound, Chuuya pulls down a sake cup and pulls a bottle of sake from another below-counter fridge. "It's less than you deserve," Chuuya says, walking over with the glasses and bottles hovering in his wake. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before you trap me in a book without my ability for a year, Dazai blinks at him. He's been so careful about not doing the math. "A year?" he asks. His voice is softer than he wants it to be. He sounds almost shocked. Chuuya hands the sake and cup to Dazai by hand, instead of making Dazai catch at them when no longer human negates the gravity holding them in mid-air. Dazai doesn't know what to say, so he busies himself, pours himself some sake, sips it. It's good, far better than he ever gets for himself these days. Being on the side that saves people might be more emotionally fulfilling, if Dazai knew what that was supposed to feel like. And it's definitely in line with Oda Sako's wishes, but it pays a hell of a lot worse than being a port mafia executive. Dazai used up a lot of his money keeping off the radar for 2 years. Besides, if he's drinking these days, the goal isn't to impress anyone, it's to force himself into unconsciousness. The cheaper stuff works better for that anyway. "A year," Chuuya confirms. He settles cross-legged onto the couch, putting the wine glass on a coaster on the side table, the wine bottle on a dish that looks a bit like an ashtray, which Dazai thinks must be there to catch condensation as it drips off the sides of the chilled bottle. "Should I bring Rampo over to apologize?" Dazai asks, taking another sip of the sake, letting the warmth of it drip down his throat. He can keep a secret after all, unlike Atsushi. No one but Fukuzawa would find out where you live from him. Chuuya snorts. He doesn't seem nearly as angry as Dazai had expected, which is strange. Dazai isn't sure what to do with it, with a Chuuya who isn't yelling at him, isn't at his throat with barbed words and strong hands. "Sure," Chuuya says, "and then you can pay my security deposit when I wreck the place yelling at him." He takes a sip of his wine, clearly savoring it. He's always been such a casual hedonist, Dazai thinks. That one bottle of wine, which Chuuya clearly considers an everyday after-work drink, probably costs more than Atsushi's monthly food budget. So does the sake Dazai is drinking, to be fair, and he's not planning on complaining about that. But Chuuya just sips the wine and looks at the skyline, keeping Dazai in his field of vision, not pressing, not demanding, not reacting at all as Dazai had expected. "Chuuya is behaving strangely," Dazai says after a long silence, When the curiosity becomes too much, when he can't find an angle into the situation, when he's not sure which approach will be most profitable, most advantageous. He doesn't have a plan after all. He came here without one, without a goal, with just the idea that he was bored and that Chuuya was interesting. And that, he thinks, is the problem. He doesn't have a plan or an objective for this meeting. He doesn't have a victory condition or a metric by which to measure success. Is this, he thinks, mind coming to a standstill, how most people approach socializing? No wonder Kunikida so clearly finds it exhausting. Chuuya snorts. What? Dazai demands, and lets a little bit of a whine slip into his tone. Drink your sake, Chuuya advises. He's still looking out the window. I'll yell at you tomorrow if you want, he says. Dazai takes a sip of the sake. Only Chuuya can be so confusing. It's not fair. I will absolutely yell at you later, Chuuya says, looking into his wine glass. That book was fucking terrible, and Arahabaki's been a bitch and a half since I got back. But you didn't know how long it would be, and you checked on me when you woke up. Dazai blinks at him. He vaguely remembers Chuuya being there when he woke up for the first time, though he'd been bleary, fogged with painkillers that Yosano told him later Chuuya had demanded she restrict. He thinks back to that moment, to waking in the agency's infirmary, to seeing Chuuya there, to the momentary spike of reassurance panic calm he'd felt at seeing Chuuya, at not knowing where they were, realizing finally that they weren't in Mori's clinic or in the Port Mafia medical ward, but in Yosano's infirmary. Dazai hasn't considered why Chuuya's presence was comforting, why seeing him had brought a deep-boned sense of comfort before any of the fear of Mori or the Mafia had kicked in. Once he knows why, he can't stop knowing. Some things are better unexamined. He had checked on Chuuya, Dazai thinks. He'd known, even then, that Chuuya had been gone, that he needed to be sure Chuuya was alright, that corruption wasn't going to take over, that he wasn't going to lose Chuuya again. Okay, he says, for lack of anything better to say. Now I know you're fucked up, Chuuya says, but there's hardly any bite in it. Just that, okay? Okay, Chuuya. Dazai carols and pours himself more sake. I'll let my dog bark at me if it makes him happy. I'd hardly be a good pet owner if I... Chuuya throws a slim book at him. Dazai catches it without spilling any of the sake and grins before turning it around. French surrealist poet? Dazai asks. Really, Chuuya? You're such an old man. Couldn't you read something published this century? He starts to throw the book towards the trash. Chuuya makes a gesture, and the book swoops back to his hand, clearly under the control of his own internal gravity. Dazai feels himself smiling, really smiling. Maybe he was right all those years ago, and anything worth wanting slips out of his hands. Maybe he'll lose this too, maybe soon. But Dazai can't help thinking, not all good things have wilted in his grasp. The agency is still here, 2 years later, after Dostoevsky, after the Guild, and Chuuya came back. So Dazai drinks his sake and teases Chuuya about his taste in poetry, and carefully doesn't think about why this matters or what it might mean. Once he knows, after all, he can't stop knowing. Gosh, I love me a good character study, especially a good duo study. Managing to pull it off with one character unconscious is a feat. Like, Dazai made checking on Chuuya a priority twice, and Chuuya never knew that the first time is how Dazai got into that state in the first place. Also, Chuuya knowing all of Dazai's evading care tricks is so real, and I actually get why the agency would know so little about these specific behavioral patterns of Dazai. The Mafia is a place of constant pain and wounds, so naturally, Chuuya would notice patterns about Dazai's behavior during those times. While at the agency, Dazai would get hurt, 4 times per year? Not enough time to notice patterns. So this was a sweet, thoroughly thoughtful fic about Chuuya grasping the differences between the Mafia and the agency, about his relationship with Dazai. I love him bonding with Kunikida over it. I love him having a liking to Yosano in the end. I love Dazai being out of the loop of what exactly happened and letting it be that way. Thank you so much, tucuxi, for your wonderful writing. I hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as I enjoyed narrating your lovely work. And thank you, dear listeners, for watching. Don't forget to send kudos to the author through the link in the description. Also, if you'd like to request any fics, YouTube community tabs are now open for you to post, aside from Tumblr. And if you'd like to show more support or check out the monthly schedule, click the link through Ko-fi. Hope you have a great week. Till next time.